The scratchy, cheap polyester of the catering vest felt like a direct insult against my skin, especially with the $5,000 bespoke Italian silk suit I was wearing underneath it. My mother's manicured nails were digging so deep into my bicep, I could feel my pulse thudding against her grip. "Serve the caviar, Elara. Keep your head down, and for God's sake do not make eye contact with the guests," Valerie hissed, her voice a jagged blade in the cramped, dark cloakroom. "If anyone asks, you're from the agency. You are a ghost. You do not exist." She didn't know that by forcing me into this uniform, she wasn't hiding a disappointment. She was handing a silver tray to the woman who held her entire future, and the future of everyone in that ballroom, in the palm of her hand. 2 hours earlier, I had parked my rented, an unremarkable sedan at the edge of the gravel driveway. My actual vehicle, a custom-armored black SUV carrying 2 of the most highly trained private security contractors in the country, was idling 3 blocks away, out of sight. I had given them strict orders: do not intervene unless I signal. I knew exactly what I was walking into. Newport estates like this one were designed to broadcast wealth, but to me they just looked like fragile glass houses. I walked through the iron doors expecting a cold shoulder, perhaps a seat at the furthest table from the stage. I didn't expect a kidnapping into a cloakroom and a demand to play the servant. Valerie slammed the cloakroom door, locking us in with the scent of expensive fur coats and mothballs. "Preston's family controls half of the global communications infrastructure, Elara. The governor is in the garden. We cannot have your embarrassing poverty and your dead-end IT support job ruining Sienna's night." I looked at her, my expression a mask of cold neutrality. She saw a daughter who had wasted her potential playing with motherboards in a garage. She didn't see the founder of Apex Vanguard. She didn't know that the communications infrastructure she worshipped ran on proprietary servers that I designed, I patented, and I owned. "Fine," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I'll serve." Valerie smirked, a triumphant, cruel twist of her lips. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully buried her failure of a daughter under a polyester vest. She had no idea she had just initiated the ultimate stress test for her own survival. I stripped off my trench coat, unfolded my silk blazer into a staff locker, and buttoned up the stiff white shirt. As I pushed through the swinging kitchen doors into the ballroom, the wall of noise hit me, the clinking of crystal, the hum of forced laughter, and the suffocating scent of old money. For the next 90 minutes, I was a ghost. I moved through the crowd with a silver tray of beluga caviar. It was fascinating, really. These were the titans of industry, the movers and shakers of the East Coast, and not one of them looked at my face. I was just a hand, a tray, a utility. I saw my sister, Sienna, standing near the grand staircase. She was draped in custom couture that probably cost more than Valerie's first house, flashing a diamond that looked like a small glacier. She was loudly narrating her upcoming honeymoon in Monaco to a circle of nodding women. "Oh, it's just so exhausting being this chosen," Sienna giggled, her eyes scanning the room for more attention. Her gaze passed right over me. She didn't even recognize her own sister. To her, I was just part of the furniture. Then there was Preston, the golden boy, the heir to the Gallagher dynasty. He was at the bar, knocking back expensive bourbon with a group of frat bros turned VCs. As I walked past with a fresh tray, he didn't even look up. He just snapped his fingers, sharp, loud, and aggressive, right in front of my eyes. "Hey, staff, clear this trash," he barked, pointing to a cluster of empty glasses. I paused. I let the silence between us stretch for a heartbeat too long. I looked at the glasses, then at the man who would be bankrupt by Monday if I didn't sign a certain document. "Of course, sir," I whispered. I picked up his dirty glass. I saw Valerie watching from across the room, her eyes narrowing in a silent, terrifying threat. "Do not mess this up." I wasn't bothered by the disrespect. In fact, I was counting. Every snap of the fingers, every ignored thank you, every shove from a socialite was a line item on a ledger they didn't know existed, but the real clock started when I checked my watch. 8:14 p.m. Desmond Gallagher was scheduled to arrive at 8:15. The man who was currently begging my firm for a $3 billion lifeline. The man who was about to walk into a room and see the woman he called Madame Executive. The woman who held his life's work in her hands, carrying a tray of fish eggs for his arrogant son. The massive ballroom doors swung open. The air in the room seemed to get sucked out as Desmond Gallagher stepped in, flanked by a security detail that looked like they were bracing for a war zone. The music didn't stop, but the energy did. Valerie practically sprinted across the marble floor, her face contorting into a desperate, sycophantic smile. Sienna followed, dragging Preston by the arm. I stood still near a towering ice sculpture. I watched them grovel. I watched Desmond give them polite, empty nods, his eyes darting around the room with the frantic energy of a man looking for a life raft in a storm. He looked exhausted, crushed. I stepped away from the ice sculpture. I didn't go back to the kitchen. I walked straight toward the center of the elite circle. I saw Valerie's face go pale as I approached. She started shaking her head violently, her eyes screaming at me to turn around. I didn't. I stopped exactly 3 feet from Desmond Gallagher. I lowered the tray just enough so he had to look down. "Would you care for an appetizer, Mr. Gallagher?" I asked. My voice wasn't the whisper of a servant anymore. It was the voice of the boardroom. Desmond looked down at the caviar, then his eyes traveled up the cheap vest, up the white collar, and then he saw me. His reaction was more violent than I expected. His entire body went rigid, his jaw dropped. The crystal flute of champagne in his hand didn't just slip. It fell like a stone, shattering against the marble with a sound like a gunshot. The entire room went into a suffocating, terrifying silence. 50 VIPs turned as one. Desmond ignored the glass. He ignored Valerie. He shoved his own security detail aside and stepped toward me, his voice trembling with a fear that made the socialites gasp. "Ma'am, why are you wearing that?" The sound of the shattering crystal was still echoing against the high vaulted ceilings when Desmond Gallagher did something that no one in that room thought possible. He didn't call for a janitor. He didn't apologize for the mess. Instead, the man who controlled a global empire stepped forward and bowed his head, low, deep, and filled with a terrifying level of submission. "Madame Executive," Desmond stammered, his voice trembling so violently it was audible even in the back of the ballroom. I am profoundly, deeply horrified. Please tell me this is a misunderstanding. Please tell me my son's new family they didn't actually force the woman who owns my entire network into a catering vest." Valerie let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. It was a jagged shriek of absolute cognitive failure. She stumbled back, her hand catching a cocktail table for support, her eyes darting between the billionaire bowing on the floor and the daughter she had just called a dead-end failure. Sienna's face drained of every drop of color. The Monaco glow she had been bragging about evaporated, leaving behind a mask of pure, paralyzing horror. But it was Preston who broke the silence. Preston, who still hadn't processed the reality of the situation. He stepped forward, his face contorted in a mix of confusion and lingering arrogance. "Dad, what the hell are you doing? Get up!" Preston demanded, his voice cracking. "That's just Elara. She's Sienna's sister. She's a college dropout who fixes motherboards in a garage. She's a literal nobody!" The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the breaking glass. Desmond spun around. I had never seen a man look so close to committing a public act of violence. "You spectacular, unmitigated idiot!" Desmond roared, his voice vibrating through the floorboards. "You think she fixes computers? This woman is the computer. The server she built in that garage process every single financial transaction your trust fund relies on. She owns the underlying proprietary architecture of the modern internet. She is the founder of Apex Vanguard." Desmond turned back to me, his eyes pleading. "Elara, ma'am, the $3 billion acquisition, the buyout on Monday morning. Please tell me your funding is still on the table. If my son has disrespected you, I will strip him of his name tonight." I will cancel this merger of families to save the merger of our firms." I slowly reached up and unclipped the plastic name tag from my cheap polyester vest. I placed it onto my silver tray, which was still resting on the table next to the ice sculpture. "It wasn't just your son, Desmond," I said. My voice was calm, analytical, and projected with the kind of authority that made the governor, who was watching from the edge of the circle, straighten his tie in nervous reflex. "My mother and sister forced me into this uniform in the cloakroom 2 hours ago. They were terrified that my embarrassing poverty would ruin their social climbing. They told me to keep my head down and avoid eye contact with the rich guests." I turned my gaze to Valerie. She looked like she was trying to disappear into the wallpaper. "No, you told me to make myself useful, Valerie," I noted, my tone devoid of any anger, which made it 1,000 times more chilling. "And I have been. For the last 90 minutes, I've been performing a stress test on the people who are about to marry into the Gallagher dynasty. I've watched your future son-in-law snap his fingers at me like a dog. I've watched my sister boast about wealth she didn't earn while treating her own blood like a ghost." I looked back at Desmond. "Your company's financial audits are solid, Desmond. The buyout will proceed on Monday morning at 9 a.m. I don't let personal emotions dictate global infrastructure. However," I paused, letting the word hang in the air like a guillotine. "I refuse to let parasites attach themselves to the empire I built, and I certainly won't authorize a deal that indirectly funds the lifestyle of people who value human beings based on the brand of their suit." Desmond didn't hesitate. He was a survivor. He knew exactly what had to be cut to save the ship. He turned to Preston, his face hard and unforgiving. "Take that ring off her finger, right now," Desmond commanded. "But Dad," Preston started. "Now!" Desmond bellowed. "This engagement is permanently terminated. You are not marrying into this family. And Valerie, Sienna, you are officially blacklisted from every Gallagher property, every event, and every subsidiary worldwide. If I ever see your faces near my son or my business again, I will use every legal resource I have to ensure you never step foot in this social circle again." Preston, entirely lacking a spine, didn't even look at Sienna. He reached out, grabbed her hand, and violently yanked the massive diamond ring off her finger. Sienna burst into hysterical, violent sobs, sinking to her knees on the marble floor. "Elara, please, it was Mom's idea. I love you. You know I've always looked up to you." The transparency of her sudden affection was sickening. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. I unbuttoned the cheap catering vest, pulled it off my shoulders, and dropped it directly onto the floor in front of Valerie's designer shoes. Underneath, my bespoke silk suit shimmered in the ballroom lights, a silent final confirmation of who I really was. "Do not attempt to contact my corporate offices," I instructed Valerie, offering her one final detached look, "and do not show up at my security gates. You successfully removed the embarrassment from your life tonight. You will never have to look at me again." I walked out of the ballroom. I passed the 50 VIPs, who parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mix of awe and terror. I walked out the heavy iron doors into the cool ocean air, where my black armored SUV was now waiting at the base of the driveway, its lights cutting through the Newport fog. Monday morning arrived with crisp, efficient clarity. I sat at the head of the mahogany conference table at Apex Vanguard headquarters. Desmond Gallagher sat across from me, looking 10 years older but immensely grateful as he watched me sign the final page of the $3 billion acquisition paperwork. I built an empire because I learned early on that the affection of superficial people is a guaranteed path to ruin. True power doesn't require a couture gown or a loud introduction. It simply requires the unwavering confidence to stand in a room full of arrogant people wearing a cheap polyester uniform, knowing that you own the very ground they are standing on. If you enjoyed this story of a secret billionaire's revenge, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Would you have stayed in the uniform or revealed yourself sooner? Let me know in the comments below.